Good evening and a very warm welcome from Kingsley Napley this afternoon. We are in London at Kingsley Napley offices, and this is a BAME event entitled Challenges Faced at Work. My name is Sandra Paul and I'm going to chair the discussion this evening. With us are the following people. Marcia Longdon, who is a partner in the Immigration Department at Kingsley Napley. Marcia joined as a partner in the Immigration Department team in January 2014. She's practiced in the area of immigration, nationality and European law since 1998. She's had a long career in the field of immigration and is incredibly passionate about this area of law. She has won a number of challenges against the Home Office regarding complex cases which have resulted in discretionary leave for her clients. Marcia is also a committee member for the Law Society Ethnic Minority Lawyers Division. Alongside Marcia, we have Paul McFarlane. Welcome, Paul. Paul is a partner in employment law at Whiteman's LLP, and he has over 20 years' experience advising on all aspects of employment law. Prior to working at Whiteman's, he worked in-house, firstly for London Transport and then for the Royal Mail. He regularly writes for the National and HR press on employment law issues. Paul has many more things that he does. He is also the chair of the Employment Lawyers Association Legislative and Policy Committee, which comments on proposals made for employment law reform by government. Paul is also a board member of the Black Solicitors Network with responsibility for careers and development, which involves him engaging with firms to try and promote better diversity. We also have with us Isaac Elwar, who is a trainee solicitor at Frees and winner of the UK Diversity Legal Awards Black Solicitors Network Rising Star for Entrepreneurship 2018. So we're in the presence of greatness here. This is the future. Isaac is a trainee solicitor at Frees, as I say, and within the profession, Isaac has an interest in mentoring junior black talent and ensuring equal and ease of access to the profession for candidates from diverse backgrounds, especially those from non-Russell Group universities. We like that. We hope that Natalie Carter will join us at some point this evening. We're hoping that she'll be here. I'll tell you a little bit about Natalie now in any event. She's a solicitor in commercial real estate and is also the director of Urban Lawyers. She was born and raised in Tottenham, North London. She comes to law by way of a degree in anthropology and law at the London School of Economics. And as I said, currently practices as a commercial real estate solicitor at a city law firm. From an early age, Natalie has been passionate about the progression of young black women and has worked tirelessly to improve diversity in the legal industry, resulting in her being recognised as the rising star in diversity by the Black Solicitors Network at the Legal Diversity Awards in 2016. Again, a very busy woman. Natalie's also the co-founder of the Black Girls Book Club, a movement dedicated to creating safe space for young black women to connect over their love of literature and live their best lives. That's really important. Okay, so that's our panel for this evening. We're going to hope to have an interesting discussion about various issues that affect us all. There were some questions that came in before we started and came on air this evening. Can I just perhaps start with one of those, if that's okay with you? It reads as follows. Have you ever been accused of using the race card? How did you handle that situation? I don't know who would like to start. Marcia, would you?
Sure, yeah. I was thinking about this question and my answer is no. I've never been accused of using the race card, so my answer is very short, unfortunately. But I was really trying to rack my brains, so no, not at all.
My answer could be as equally as short, but it won't be. So personally, no, I've never been accused of playing the race card, but in my practice as an employment lawyer over 20 years, I've seen, I act mainly for employers, I've seen employers take the view that a number of their employees, there's a perception that they may have played the race card. And my answer to that response initially is, well, we've got to actually go through the evidence. let's look at what happened in the situation, and let's go through each stage and test it against how you would have treated a white person in equivalent circumstances, and can we disprove what has been said? And it's only through that analysis that we can say whether or not somebody, not necessarily paid the race card, but whether or not their complaint is made out. And I think it's important that employers, whoever the employer is, understands that just merely making that statement is not good enough. They actually have to show and demonstrate that. Because I see when I'm advising employers where they have race discrimination complaints, there is certainly a lot of anxiety around allegations of race being made against them, but both at a senior and junior level, because it's seen that if such a finding is made against someone or organisation, it obviously affects them reputationally and it could have an impact on their career. So there is a lot of anxiety around it, but notwithstanding the anxiety, it still needs to be looked at objectively and tested, and where there isn't a proper explanation for the behaviour, then in those cases you might have to settle them.
Okay. So is there ever a legitimate reason for saying this is because of my race, do you think, Isaac?
I think there definitely is. But what I found growing up in England is that as time has gone on, situations of racial injustice, or in particular kind of coded racism, they become more and more covert, and so it's harder to kind of, it's difficult. It's one of those scenarios where when you're a victim of something, you become acutely aware of what you go through, and you become acutely aware of the kind of oppression that you face. But obviously people who either perpetuate it or aren't victims of it don't know exactly what you're referring to, and so it's very difficult to prove it. So often I face situations, both in professional and kind of, I guess, casual employment when I was a student, where the way people would speak to me, I could tell it was very anti-black. I could just tell. It was the kind of way they would ask me to do things, and they would use my name. So there would be a heavy emphasis on, oh, come on, Isaac. And it was really obviously patronizing. And I just think to myself, if I kind of think if I was the opposite of what I am, so if I was a white man, for example, would that happen to me? And I think it probably wouldn't happen to me. And that's used to be sort of the barometer I used to use. And it's annoying because it does happen, but it's very difficult to prove that to people. It can be very, very, very hard, but it does, unfortunately, does happen. And I have experienced that sort of thing happening to me myself.
And in terms of your best advice, Paul, in particular, where you might think that an issue has arisen, or you have experienced a particular treatment, and you suspect that it is because of your race, what would be your top tip for how you approach that? Is it about documenting it? Is it about challenging it? Do you store it up until you've got a good body of information and then hit it? What's the best way to deal with it?
Certainly need to document it. Certainly need to have a record of instances where you can point to behaviour which you consider is different to treatment that you have suffered. I think with all kinds of disputes, I don't know if you're all litigators or not, but with all kinds of disputes, but particularly in the workplace, if there is a means by which, or mechanism by which you can try to tackle it early before it gets embedded, that's the best way, because the more there's a build up of it, the more likelihood that there's going to be a flashpoint, and then the relationship can never be retrieved. So, and I think we're going to come onto this later with some advice about this, but I think the earlier that it can be addressed, the better, but that's probably easier said than done.
Absolutely, but it's good advice. Okay. I'm coming to you, Isaac. What is the biggest challenge you have faced as a result of your race or ethnicity? It's a big one.
It
You might have to think about it a while. You guys can start thinking while we're.
But I think it is, I kind of alluded to it before, but it's the way you're spoken to, and I've become very acutely aware that it is because I'm black. It's still, and I've had, and the fact that I've had it when I was like 16, and I've had it when I was like 23, and one was in a professional context, one wasn't in a professional context, and they were in completely, obviously, different environments. It's the exact same tone that people use. It's a very, very patronizing tone, and it's difficult because when people speak to you like that often, and I was talking to my friends about the scenarios that happened to me before, and they were saying that in that kind of scenario, what someone was often trying to do is obviously belittle you, but they're trying to also get a reaction out of you, and especially in an employment context, they want to get a reaction out of you, so therefore there could be consequences to you. So they want to get a rise out of you, and in particular as a black man, they want you to get angry, and then they say, oh, they want to effectively use your anger to be kind of like, oh, he's unstable, or he's a threat to people, and then that's how you end up losing your job, or you kind of get brought into disciplinary, or something like that happens. So the biggest barrier I face is having to deal with that, and then having to work with people when you know that they are very happy to condescend you, especially if you're a junior. It can be really, really hard, and it's just it gets tiring, because you just kind of think, when is anybody ever going to kind of speak to you in a respectful tone, or kind of not assume that you're stupid, because that's often what's laden with it as well. It's kind of laced with a bit of as if you're a bit dopey, and that's the thing I frequently sort of face. And it's just that sort of thing of having to kind of go into an environment where you know people are going to speak to you like that at certain points, and just have to muddle through it. And it's difficult, because I've mentioned this to other young black professionals that work in lots of different positions or industries, and people always say it's really frustrating, because what can happen is you can internalize that and then think, I don't belong here anymore. And when you get to that point, I know for myself anyway, if I kind of mentally check out, it's a kind of like a bit of a point of no return. And it's very hard, because when you get to that point, it can then become obvious to people that it stops your passion, and then it affects how you view yourself, it affects your work, etc., etc., etc. And so that's a real difficulty, unfortunately, when you just have to kind of remain professional, even though you're faced with a situation, or you're in an environment which is effectively unprofessional. There's nothing you can really do about it.
Okay, but it sounds like that you have found some ways to manage that. So if you were giving us your best tip for managing those situations, it sounds like you're saying, don't rise to the bait, really.
Yeah, and don't isolate yourself. That's
Right.
the thing
Okay.
I found. So funny enough, people like Natalie were really instrumental in being helpful, and find people that are older and have been through a similar situation and know how to kind of, I guess, kind of internally mediate, because you have to mediate with yourself, and just not rise to the occasion and realize that things do pass eventually.
That's really useful. Okay. Natalie Carter has joined us. Thank you, Natalie.
Sorry, I was late.
Oh, please don't worry. We were talking about the biggest challenge we have faced as a result of race and ethnicity. I'm going to ask Paul to answer the question, which gives you a little bit of time to catch your breath.
Thank you.
It's a difficult question, I suppose. Not directly because of my race, but I suppose obtaining partnership in my firm, given that I am the only black lawyer, black partner in my firm, not Asian, but black partner. That was a challenge, not because of any overt issues within the firm, but it's obviously an issue. There's very few black lawyers within the firm, and just trying to get the partnership to believe in me, I suppose that's the thing. But to be fair to my firm, I think they were very supportive in terms of how we approached the process. So when I joined Waitman's, I had a 3-year plan to become a partner. I was in-house before, and I never thought about working in a law firm. My wife worked for a law firm. I worked in-house, perfectly happy. And then I came to a point where I just felt I needed a fresh challenge. So I joined the firm. I had this 3-year plan. Second year, I went for partnership. Didn't get through with it. But what I'd say about the firm, which was very good, was 2 things. One, the managing partner came down from Liverpool, came down and spent an hour and a half with me and explained to me in a lot of detail why I didn't get through, and things he thought that I needed to do in order to achieve it the next year. And secondly, at that time, they were running a coaching program. So I was assigned a coach to the director of HR. And for the next 6 months, each month, we'd have a session of about an hour where she would talk to me about things that I could do to support my application the next time. And it worked. And so that was a challenge, but I think similarly to what Isaac said about not isolating yourself, I think the first time I did it, I sort of did it by myself. And I think maybe as BAME lawyers, we tend, especially in our junior stages, to do things by ourselves because we've not got, we feel we haven't got the networks around us, and actually we have a lot of networks around us. And I think now the junior lawyers have a lot of stuff, a lot of people and networks that we. Well, I speak for myself, I shouldn't speak for everyone, but certainly when I was starting out 20 plus years ago, there weren't the amount of black lawyers that there are now. There were a lot of black lawyers, but we were all quite junior. So we all sort of muddled through, sort of walking through the dark, next steps, how do we actually get through? Didn't know what we were really doing. Well, I felt that way anyway. I think now there's much more access to networks that you can get information from people, you can sort of get knowledge from people, and use that to your advantage going forward. So that's the thing that I would sort of take away from my experience of this law game.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you. And Marcia, from your perspective, what is the biggest challenge you faced as a result of your race and ethnicity?
I think following on from what Paul has said, I completely agree. I mean, like 22 years ago, you didn't have that sort of network. So whilst the Law Society at the time, so it said, oh, you know, you've got the Black Solicitors Network. I just felt at the time you could never actually access them. And I remember I was working for a firm many years ago, and this woman accused me of being on drugs. She was a client. She was screaming at me in this room. And because I wasn't responding to her screaming at me, she said, you people, you just take drugs. That's what it is. You just take drugs. The reason why I couldn't respond to her, and it's one of my deepest regrets to this day, so that's why I said it was 20 odd years ago, was because I knew if I said anything, I was going to burst into tears because I could not believe the way this woman was talking to me. And at the time, my boss said, oh, I've never sacked a client. I want to sack this woman. And I said to her, you're not sacking her. I said, you're not going to sack her. I said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to get what she wants. And I knew I could get it. I'm going to get what she wants. And I did. And she was so happy that she sent me all these gifts via her chauffeur. She was a very wealthy woman. And I had the pleasure of sending them all back to her. And when she called me and she said, but Marcia, it's, you know, I don't know, all sorts of things. And I said to her, I've never had someone speak to me the way that you spoke to me. And because of that, you've made me stronger, because I will never have anyone talk to me like that again. And I haven't, because I won't put up with it. But I get Paul's point and your point, Isaac, that when you're just starting out, it is hard. And in your head, you want to say all sorts of things to these very mean people, but you don't. And also, I think we often experience, what I often experience is, because of the internet and phones and so on, sometimes your client never gets to see you. And when your client does see you, they go, oh. And I know what that oh means. I know that oh means, oh, Marcia, I wasn't expecting you to be black. But then they get over it, and then they see you for the professional that you are and for the person that you are. So, yeah, you know, I could go on and give you stories all day long, but that's not what defines me. It isn't what defines me. And for many young people just starting out in their profession, I probably skipped ahead, but I do believe you've got to call it out. You've got to call it out, but we'll talk about that more. I don't want to jump ahead.
Natalie.
I don't have a similar story to Marcia, but it wasn't an issue that I had with a client, it was with one of my own supervisors. And I think some things have been difficult for me, sometimes dealing with stereotypes that they just are about young black women anyway. So I remember kind of just having a conversation with the supervisor, leader of my team, just about what I wanted for my future family, and saying, like, for example, that I wanted to have 4 kids, and she said something like, I bet they'd all have different dads. So, you know, these type of things, you know, and then what do you say as like a young NQ when you know that something like that?
Like yours. Oh, sorry.
Do you know what I mean? Has been said like that, and you do have those moments of regrets where you wish you could go back and say this and that. But I think it was good in that time that I froze and I didn't say anything, because when you react on emotion, I was probably going to put myself in a position where I wasn't going to win, and the focus was going to be more on my reaction rather than what had been said. But it kind of it did give me a little bit of awareness that sometimes people just didn't see me for who I was, and that, you know, sometimes when you're in these environments, you probably are the first black person that these professionals are dealing with, and they have all different stereotypes, whether that's in the media, on the news, in soaps. And sometimes these are very negative, and your presence alone doesn't necessarily dismantle those stereotypes. So I think that has been the most difficult thing for me, simply because the regret of not saying the right thing, then feeling upset about the fact that someone would even say something like that, then not reporting it. But fortunately for me, someone reported it on my behalf. And so it was dealt with, but I didn't have to feel like I had made a sacrifice for my own career, or I was going to be drawing attention to myself because of what had been said to me. Someone else picked up on it and they ran with it, and it was dealt with. So I was quite lucky, because I can imagine if she said that to me, she probably said that to, you know, similar comments to lots of different people, and it was dealt with. But that was kind of a turning point in terms of it. You still have those stereotypes that you're dealing with, and you're not always just judged on your own merit and what you've achieved so far. So it was an unfortunate wake-up call for me, but it hasn't defined my career. It's just something to be aware of, that you can be affected by that. But then also that you don't, I know you said challenge it, Marcia, but you don't have to rise to it every time. And sometimes things will be dealt with over your head. That might not be the best way. You might feel like you've got justice for yourself. But sometimes as a junior node, there's always that balance between, you know, what do I want attention for? I want attention for the quality of my work, not for these complaints that I'm working with, that I'm dealing with somewhere. So it's difficult.
So does that sound like there is an extra level of responsibility that you carry, either as being the first partner? I think, Lucy, you had a similar situation in your current employment as well. And you're describing things where there is something else that you have to do apart from just being good. Is that right? Yeah. And how do you carry that?
I mean, I think it was hard. I'm slightly older than
Slightly.
I didn't want to judge people's ages, so I'm slightly older than Master. And I think it was certainly harder. I think it's hard now, but harder then, because, as I say, we didn't have, one, the numbers, and two, people like us in senior positions, not necessarily in our own firm, but at least within our body, our peer group, who we could sort of talk to about how do we deal with this situation. And so I sort of took the view that what I did, looking back on it, was really sort of stumble through. I didn't really know what I was doing. I knew there were certain situations where I'd have to suck it and see, or deal with it as you do, Natalie, and I wouldn't feel comfortable about that. But I think in terms of to progress your career, sometimes you have to do that. And I think now, for a number of reasons, what Marcia said about calling it out, I think you can call it out a lot more than you did. You don't have to do it every time, one. I think there's more support, both internally. Most firms now, I think, at least notionally get that race is an issue that they need to deal with. I think it's still, in terms of the diversity space, it's still the most uncomfortable for them to deal with, but they have to deal with it. And so I think you can get support to deal with these issues, depending on how serious it is. Then you need to call it out.
Okay. So it sounds like you're saying that challenging, calling things out is a legitimate way to deal with perhaps discriminatory remarks that are relevant to ethnicity, etc., but not always. What do you think, Isaac?
Sometimes it can be very hard, especially if you're the only one. I've been in situations or where I've worked in very small environments, and so I'm the only, well, in general, from like a firm perspective, which is very common for lots of people, might be either the only black person, the only black male, the only black female. And then that can be very hard because everyone's looking at you anyway, even if you think that they're not, they are. And so if something's happening to you and it's negative, and in particular it's because of your racial background or ethnicity, you're acutely aware of it. I mean, you know, obviously, because you're going through it, but it's hard because you don't want to further put yourself in a negative position. So it's kind of like you might go to a hospital and get treatment, and then you get bad treatment, and then it's the only hospital that you have available. And you don't want to raise a complaint because you feel that when you have to go to the hospital, they're going to know that you're the troublemaker, and then you're not going to get the care you deserve. And it can be hard because, especially if you can't leave. So, say for example, you're in a training contract, you can't leave for a certain period of time, or it's a job that you need and you've been looking for a job forever. It can be really hard. There's been where you just have to kind of muddle through things, and it can be actually really, really, really tricky. It's a tricky one. It's a very, very hard one. Sometimes you just have to, I think, not internalize it too much. That's the one thing you try not to do.
Sorry.
Of course.
Yeah,
Marcia.
I just want to say, I do obviously understand that. And when I say call it out, I think you have to pick your battles. I definitely think that. I'm not naive to that. But following on from what Paul said, for example, yourself, Isaac, you've hopefully got more resources. So I would hope that perhaps you'd call me and say, oh my God, Marcia, this happened. How would you deal with it? Or you'd call one of your, you know what I mean, colleagues. In my day, there wasn't that kind of resource. I come from a very working class background. Nobody in my family was lawyers or anything like that. And so, like Paul says, I kind of muddled through. But at the time, the resources that I lent on was, I swear, Black history. That was what built me. That was, my father was very much into civil rights. He was part of it in the US and all this. And that's where my mind would always go to. And I'd look at those heroes from the past, and I think I'm going to be one of them. I'm going to be like, you know, I'm going to get through this. I'm not going to let them treat me in this way. Do you know what I mean? So all I'm saying is, at the time, I looked at different resources, if you like, to build me. But nowadays, in 2018, I would hope that you would use, you know, like the resources like Ethnic Minorities, Lawyers Division at the Law Society, and all these other resources to help get you through. Because 100%, you and Natalie are, you know, sounds naive to say, but the future, you know, it sounds frumpy or whatever, but you're going to have incredible careers because you must pick up the phone or speak to people and say, this is what happened to me today. How do you think I should deal with it? What should I do? That's what I mean when I say, you know, you've got more resources. It doesn't help with the pain at the time or the difficulty at the time, but use those, you know, resources.
I was going to say, for BME lawyers, a big part of the problem is you kind of self-isolate. It's not the victim's fault, but it's often the environment you're in. If you're like the only one, you feel like there's no one like you, so you kind of retreat a bit. And then if things go wrong, that makes it, you find it hard to kind of come out of your retreating place because you've been treating to yourself to be safe.
It's
and
like
then
a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly. And so you feel like because there's no one like you, you can't find anyone like you, and you're the only one, especially if you work in a smaller office, in a bigger network.
But turn it on its head.
So,
turn it on its head. There are people.
So just thinking about that then. So Natalie, it sounds like both you and Isaac, so in fact we're all saying that network is incredibly important. How do you go find the network? Where do you start? What do you do?
I think there's a big difference from when I was starting to look for a training contract to now, is that there seems to be so many more people on LinkedIn, and you have that extra level of visibility. Because I suppose if you just looked at my name, Natalie Carter, you would not necessarily know that I was a Black woman, but if you go on my LinkedIn profile, you can see, you know, what I look like, you know, who I am. And I think that's one thing that I didn't necessarily have when I was starting out, but LinkedIn has grown, and you can have networks. You can just, I do have a habit of just going, and if I see like a Black female lawyer, I just click Black lawyer, I just add everyone. But I think it's good to be like that, even if you don't necessarily have something to say at that point. You can see what that person's doing. You get an idea through their postings of what their passions are and what their concerns are, and the stance they take from diversity. Because you can flip on its own, you can have a network, but not everybody is willing to be accessible. Not everybody wants to be involved in the conversation, and so there is that. I suppose that kind of, you hesitate slightly before you reach out to someone because you don't know what approach they're going to take to you even contacting them in the first place with your particular issue. And so that's always kind of been in the back of my head, like you're connecting with this person, you want to talk to them, but you don't know if they just want to support you or offer you help because you're a black woman. It might not everybody feels that way, not everybody has to feel that way. And so there is always that kind of minor concern, but I feel like with LinkedIn having a lot more events, having a much wider discussion about diversity across firms is also much more helpful. So I think the best way to start a network would be to go to an event, would be to meet people, and not always to try and network upwards, but to network to the side as well. So if you're a trainee, to connect with other trainees. If you're applying, to connect with other people who are applying as well. Don't just always think you need to speak to someone who's a step ahead of you, because people next to you can offer you just as much support.
That's perfect. Okay.
Can I just add on to that point? I think Natalie's hit the nail on the head for me. In terms of networking, if there's one of the questions is around what I would have done differently if I was younger now. And the one thing I really would have sort of majored on was networking. If someone had talked to me about what's the big skill that you need as a lawyer or as a professional, that's something that if someone had told me that, I would have been sort of 5 years ahead of where I am now. Because I think, as Natalie said, it's not just about people you know above you, but your peer group, because your peer group would be those people that you're going to move up with as your career develops, their career develops. And that's both internally within your firms and externally in terms of clients. They're going to be the people who are going to be moving up with you. And if you keep connected with them, that is where your source of growth is going to be going forward. And if there's one thing I would have sort of majored on, and I major this to anybody I speak, any of the junior lawyers I speak to, that's the thing you need to focus on, networking. And not just, don't be, well, I personally I'm not a networker who can just sort of work a room. I can't do that. That's not me. I have to have actually an engagement with that person. I have to feel that I know them, I can talk to them properly, and it's not literally have a conversation and dip out to another person. It's got to have a meaningful relationship. That's me. Some people are very good at doing this dipping in, dipping out. I can't do it, but some people are very good at it. That wouldn't be me. But have meaningful relationships with people. And the social networks, LinkedIn has been good for me. I'm a Luddite in terms of, I was a Luddite.
Unashamed.
I was a Luddite up until about 5 or 6 years ago. I started with LinkedIn, and now I've sort of gone onto Twitter. So that's about it. My children sort of told me, when I went onto Twitter and started using Twitter quite a lot, they were just disgusted by the idea. What are you doing on Twitter? What? No, I'm coming off it now. You can't. Right, so I'm not allowed on Snapchat. Not that I would ever be on Snapchat, but in terms of for professional development wise, LinkedIn has been a source of so much good stuff. So I've met a lot of people through LinkedIn, and it's really helped sort of build a positive network, and I definitely would encourage people to use it. But again, I think what Natalie said as well is really true, that I think you need to have meaningful relationships. It's more helpful when you go to an event, meet someone, have a conversation with them, and then connect, rather than you get these spurious connections and you can, where do I know this person from? I have no idea where this person's. There's no meaningful reason why I would connect with this person, because I don't know them. They're black, yeah, fine, or they're Asian, they're fine. But beyond that, nothing else.
Okay, and so it sounds like when you're talking about longevity here in terms of your career, how do you stay motivated? How can you stay motivated, Marcia?
Motivated from a career perspective, or from race, or do better. I think just be the professional that I want to be the expert in my field. I think because this is a discussion about race, I think, again, harping on to when I was much younger, I felt as though I had to be better than my counterparts in order to get ahead. So that's kind of never left me in a way. And I was not a good student, trust me. I was not brilliant academically or anything like that. But when it comes to my career, it means a lot to me because I wouldn't want, to go through the experiences I've been through before. And so I try to be better than I am because my academics were not great. And so I just have to be this, hard-working professional, basically.
Nice. At just a different stage in your career. What's your plan for remaining motivated?
Other people.
Yeah.
Other people. So when I meet, so I have a network, it's the Black Men in Law Network, and that has been really helpful for me because I see younger versions of myself, even slightly younger, and people are kind of worried, I don't know if I belong in the room. So, for example, at the UK Legal Diversity Awards, we got 2 guys from the network. They were students at the moment. One of them had been to some professional events before, but the other one hadn't, and was really kind of like, don't know if I belong here, don't know if I belong here. And I was like, yes, you do. Yeah. And I brought him because I was like, you are like me, in the sense where you could be in a room like that, but you're opting to not be in it because you feel a bit nervous because you've never been to an event like it before. And I said to him, I said, you have to get used to being in rooms like this. And it's funny because there were quite a lot of black people in the room, and he was a young black guy. But it's the kind of a caliber of the event or any kind of thing which is remotely showy. You have to wear a suit when you're not used to wearing a suit. You have to be kind of around professionals, and you don't feel like you're a professional, even though you are and you're going to be one. And so that's what helps me a lot. And the thing is, it links to what Paul was saying before, how you through the network, I've met so many people. Almost in a tiring way, it's like, oh my gosh, more people. It's like, where do all these people come from? Like, they want to contact you to talk to about anything. But it's fantastic because you realize there are so many people out there and everyone's trying to do similar sort of things. And it's been wonderful, actually. I think this year, last year, meeting the amount of people that I've met, particularly young black professionals, it's actually very, very motivational because you can see your peers doing things. And even if you're having sort of a bad day, you might get a message from someone and you'll just start laughing and realize it's not actually that bad. And it's actually very, very helpful having that environment. And that's what I mean by meeting those people. It stops you internalizing a lot of things that you're going through because you realize other people are going through similar sort of things. And then you can reach out to them, and often you might talk to some friends and they'll have a huge discussion about anything and everything. And then it's actually quite helpful because you just realize that you are not the only one, and it takes it off you feeling like it's your burden to face alone. And it's a kind of a systemic problem, and it's not the best, but it's a very helpful way of realizing that you can continue. You don't have to kind of leave the profession because you've got a support network of people that are going to do the same type of thing.
Thank you.
That helps me a lot.
Excellent. So we've got 2 questions and they're related, so you can pick any part of the question you would like to answer. The first is, I'm a BAME champion within my organisation. Any tips on how to approach colleagues when complaints are made regarding their conduct? And the second part of the question is, how can BAME allies provide more support? And they're related in my mind, and so perhaps you could start, Natalie, with wherever you'd like to.
I'll start with BAME allies. That's the less tricky question.
It's a good place.
I think the best way for BAME allies to provide more support is to encourage people who are not necessarily BAME, who don't necessarily identify as BAME, to feel that they are welcome in BAME network and BAME participant events, and that they can be part of the conversation. Because I feel like this strand of diversity, like Paul had said before, race, is quite uncomfortable. And so if you have a Black History Month event, some people, if they're not Black, they feel like they can't go. And so if you are a BAME ally, it's easier for you to have a conversation with someone who isn't BAME and say, I'm going to this event, do you want to come with me? Because you've already automatically broken down that barrier because you're not BAME and you're going to support this event, and the person you're speaking to isn't. Because I think sometimes with networks, from my experience, you need to have the right people in the room for the networks really to have an impact. And if you have a network and you have certain events where you're kind of discussing things like unconscious bias, even things that we're discussing here today, if you only have BAME people in the room and you only have BAME people listening, the conversation only gets so far, the impact only gets so far. And I remember at a BAME network event at the firm I worked at, you know, someone in my team saying like, can I actually go? Because, you know, I'm not a BAME person. And I was like, of course, it's for everyone. And sometimes we just think it's obvious, but it's not obvious. So if you're a BAME ally, just making sure that you speak to other people that aren't BAME and just say, I'm going, do you want to come? This is open to everyone, because you're automatically breaking down that barrier. In terms of discussions about conduct and things that people say, my professions, that one, I have to be honest, I wouldn't necessarily know how to deal with it, because it depends on the person's reaction and also what was said. So sometimes if you have someone who's quite emotional about something that's been said, quite angry, you have to manage that person. And then also, because if what they said offensive, you yourself can't take that offence, and you try and mitigate that. And sometimes I feel like that's difficult if you don't have like leadership experience. So you hear that someone was saying, you're outraged yourself, but then how do you then, as a professional, go to that other person and mediate? I would also say it's probably a conversation to involve HR in, to the extent that, you know, the person is offended and they want to do something about it. I think the best place to deal with it in HR, because if you're not careful, you can end up causing more problems than you solve if you don't deal with things in a correct way. I know that's a bit of a cop out saying just go to HR, but I think sometimes it would be better to do that and have things on record and have a more kind of disciplined conversation, measured, procedural conversation, than to have a kind of emotional reaction again. So that's what I would do, just straight to HR.
Thank you, Master.
Sorry, I think you're absolutely right. I think one of the things that you touched on was, if you're in a leadership role, then I know that if I've witnessed something, or if an incident's happened, then I know immediately I'd separate the people and I'd speak to each of them separately to find out what happened and so on, or at least to explain to someone, actually, Mary feels this way. But I'd separate them, and then, because it depends on what it is as well, because sometimes that the person who has said something might not have meant it in that way, didn't appreciate the impact it was going to have on that other person. So sometimes I think it's worth giving that individual an opportunity to understand the impact of their words or their behaviour on the person who received it, at the same time speaking to that person, because a lot of the times you might not realise, obviously if it's something very obvious, right, racial comment, of course you're going to know, but there could be something which, when we talk about unconscious bias, things happen, right? But I'd separate them, and I'd need to understand. And if the person who said it, if they weren't willing, if you like, to appreciate their behaviour or their impact on that other person, then as somebody who's in a leadership role, then I would find it my duty to bring HR in. But initially, I would want to give both parties an opportunity to hopefully come together, because I think that happens. I said something, what did I say? I was talking to, right. But I'm going to bring myself out here. But anyway, I was doing an interview, and the lady who was interviewing was Welsh. And so I said to her, can you sing? Without kind of thinking. And it wasn't, I meant like, could you sing because we have a choir? I was talking about the other things that we have on. But as I said it, I wanted to take it back, because I was like, you're going to think, and then I said to her, you're going to think I'm asking if you can sing because you're Welsh. I'm really not. We have a choir, and it's one of the, and then we all ended up laughing about it. But that was me trying to justify that I wasn't, implying anything. So, if you like, that's what I think.
Okay. And Paul, you can give us a professional, kind of studied answer, or you can give us your gut feeling.
It's a difficult one, but I think what Natalie and Marcia said, sort of taking them to, right. I mean, I'd add, if depending on the size of the firm, some organisations have sort of a helpline or something where you can anonymously raise issues, and maybe the anonymous place to raise issues is through maybe your network, and that can then be fed back to the person. Not to say there's going to be, or depending on how serious it is, but not necessarily to say that will result in any disciplinary action. But I think what Marcia said, just to make that person aware that what they said, what they did, had this impact on that person, and need to have some sort of self-reflection around it, because that might then hopefully make them twig about, in the future, I need to really think about what I say and how I act before I do what I do. But that's, I wouldn't add much more than what's been said.
Okay. Isaac, give you a chance to add anything.
I'd echo what everyone else said, but the one thing I would try and do, if possible, is just adding some kind of slight historical context for people. And the reason I think it's really important to do that is because some people don't understand the historical ramifications of what happened. So especially with a lot of people of colour, I'm speaking from obviously a black person's perspective, a lot of these things have happened to, obviously they happen to you, they happen to your parents, they happen to your grandparents, and you've been raised in that environment knowing that those things happen.
Mm.
So if someone says something to you, you're like, oh, I've absolutely had it, and you just snap. Because often these are things that happen to you throughout your life, often from childhood. And so it's I'm 26, so by the time this happened to me, someone's said something to me, and I'm having a bad day, for example, it's like, I've had this since I was 5, I've had enough. And that's often where someone who's a victim of often a microaggression is coming from, because it's constant. It's like a screwdriver. It's like constantly just like wedging the way in, and then it just hits a nerve and you just snap. And it's important to explain that to people. So I remember being very quickly, I was at an event at a city law firm when I was a paralegal, and they were trying to inspire young black lawyers, and people. Exactly, I'm at Natalies. And afterwards, I got a training contract, and then they wanted me to kind of speak to the students, and I did. But they wanted feedback about the event, and the young black students kind of got a bit heated when it came to the subject of natural hair in the workplace. And the staff were all white, and they kind of worried, and they kind of said, oh, we wonder if we can kind of like change things, and so we don't have that kind of environment. And I said to them, I said, you don't have to change a thing. And they were like, what do you mean? And I said, what you thought was heated. I said, I could assure you it wasn't heated. I said, it could have been a lot worse. It really wasn't heated. But what you saw were a lot of young black people that have never actually been able to have their voices heard, finally being able to speak in a professional environment about something that's really passionate to them and for them or about them. And they're finally getting off their chests. And they're 22, 23, and they're just getting it out. So it's a really good thing. And then they were like, oh, wow, that they had no idea. I was like, exactly. I said, don't change anything. Let that kind of conversation continue. And it's really funny because I think they did that, and then they won an award because of the impact that it had, because it was pioneering. So it's that sort of thing of sometimes you have to have those uncomfortable conversations, and not even for the people who are victims, but for the people who might not be a victim of that situation. It's uncomfortable to be around. Mm-hmm. So that's what I try and do, and sometimes it's very helpful.
And that's really important. It leads to one of the questions that's come in. It says, can you share your experience of speaking your mind and or being assertive without being labelled aggressive? I think you averred to this earlier, Isaac. Or coming across as an angry black man, woman, male, female. And the writer says, I've noticed the subtle ways that we can be perceived in these situations compared to our counterparts. And I think you gave some very good examples earlier on of this. But so what in terms of suggestions, ways in which you manage that situation?
Trying to, it depends on what the context is. If it's something to do with microaggressions, I think that warrants a bit of a different response if it's like a diversity committee meeting, for example. But if it's the latter, then I try and say, oh, actually, we might try and do this, because if we do this, this will happen, and then from that could happen. And then it's got to be good firm benefits. I try and make it positive in the end, and that sometimes works. If it's to do with like a microaggression, it's tricky because I've been in situations like that, and I sort of, it's really funny, I didn't say a word. And the reason I didn't say a word is often because, like I mentioned before, people often say things sometimes to get a reaction out of you, for it to have adverse consequences to you. And effectively, it's like somebody being kicked when they're down. If you're not moving, it's very obvious you're a victim. Whereas if you start kind of acting up, then some people might think differently. Yeah. So it can be tricky. It can be really, really hard. But I think trying to outline what's happened to you from an emotional perspective, and sometimes for me, I'm definitely better at putting things in words. I've always been like that since I was younger. That can be positive and negative.
Good trait for you.
It can be very, very dangerous because I don't often speak. People are like, oh my gosh, you can't say that, and I was like, oh, I didn't realize it was that extreme. But sometimes I think that can actually be helpful if you articulate how something's affected you from a personal perspective, emotionally. In words, it's very difficult to ignore. Whereas if you're listening to someone, you can attempt to dismiss it. But if you're reading a statement to people, it's often harder to if you in a professional context. I feel. I wonder what everyone else thinks.
Okay. Well, we'll find out in a moment. I just want to add a little bit. Paul, you perhaps can help us with this. How would you address the commonly held idea that raising a formal complaint about racism or discrimination is career limiting? That's a question that's come in while we've been on. It's getting all the difficult questions
career
tonight.
limiting. Well, could be in the firm that you're in. Could be. I can't deny that. And in a way, if it's got to that stage when you're in that firm, then you might need to question whether or not that's the firm for you.
There's lots of nodding going
on. I'm not saying that not to do it. I'm just saying that that's one of the issues that might come out of that, because one, if you feel you need to make a formal complaint, and two, worse still, make a formal complaint and you're concerned that it's not going to be listened to and responded to properly, then you need to question about where you are with this firm, and is this the place for you? Now that unfortunately is the reality of the situation. And whenever you make a complaint, whether it's on race or whatever issue it is, as an employee, stroke lawyer, stroke partner, that is the reality of the situation, I'm afraid. So yes, I'm afraid that could be the consequence of it. Yeah.
Okay. And Marcy, from your perspective, and I guess one of the things, we've got a variety of people listening. So from a firm point of view, how might you prevent this becoming career limiting? What's the environment that needs to be?
I think, and I'm hesitating because what I'm going to say might be rather controversial, but there you go. I think it just depends on which level you're at in your career. Because imagine if you're a trainee, right, and you're somewhere and someone's being so outrageous to you, you might have to suck that up until you finish a training contract, because coming out of a training contract can be really hard. So that's why I hesitated, because I wouldn't want someone to be going through such an awful time and then they listen to Master said suck it up. No, that's I don't really, but what I'm saying is, I'm not naive to think that, oh, we can just, challenge it, we can do all this stuff, when I think it just depends on, to some extent, where you are in your career, what has actually happened, when you're speaking to your network. If your network, say, I had one situation a couple of months ago where someone was telling me a story about the firm that they were in, and the firm that they were the only two black people in this firm, and the firm continuously just kept calling them the other person's name, right? And even when it got to their appraisal, they got all this feedback about the other person. And when the individual was saying, but that's not me, they said, oh, it's fine. When they were telling me that, I was sitting there and I had to sit on my hands, because I wanted to go down to the firm personally and do all sorts of things, which obviously wouldn't have been appropriate. But in those circumstances, I just said, no way, how could you possibly, be going through something like that, when they're getting feedback about you, but it's not about you, so that's going to impact your career anyway. So the reason why I raised that, because I think that's different. And so, yeah, I don't know if I've answered the question, I've probably gone off tangent, but that's what I think.
It's a good answer. And from your point of view, Natalie?
I think law firms in and of themselves are very political places. They are businesses, and law firms across the board have issues with bullying that runs against LGBT, sex, disability. We could go on discrimination about women who are mothers. And I think sometimes the issue is it's similar to what Marcia says. It's about where you stand as an individual and about who you are complaining about. So if you're an associate complaining about another associate, it might be easier to do that than if you're an associate complaining about a partner. For me personally, in my experience, there are a few times I could have made a complaint and I did just kind of suck it up. And I think on reflection, I do feel that if you're in a situation where you feel you need to make formal complaints or you're being bullied, there's a decision to be made as to whether you decide to stay or you decide to leave. There are so many different law firms that you can work at. I'm not saying that you should hop every 6 months, but I feel it's your life, it's your mental health is part of your self-care. That if you're not in an environment that is good for you, and you don't have the reassurance that making a complaint is going to make things better, then why would you kind of stay and try to fight the beast or try to fight the machine if there are other better options for you and other places where you're going to thrive better in your career? So I've kind of taken Paul's suggestion to think about, is this really where you want to be? And then also I would say, I don't know how people feel about this, but not necessarily to be sensitive, because I mean that sometimes people make complaints about things and I can say, well, I can see where you're coming from, but in the grand scheme of things, is that issue or that complaint really worth it? Is that the one that you really want to take all the way? You know, or if it's a situation where things are continually happening, if you do want to stay, what is the end goal? What do you see happening? Because sometimes you can make a complaint, you can go through an investigation, you can give all the interviews. That's a lot of your own personal, emotional stress and diversion away from your career and your focus. And then you might not even get the result that you want anyway, whereas in that time, you could have moved on to somewhere else, having a new situation, and just genuinely being more happy. It's a difficult one. I don't want to tell people to cop out, but I do think you need to, as you would, as a client would if they were deciding whether to sue someone or not, you need to weigh up the pros and cons and think about, is this worth your time and energy? Is this worth the sacrifice? And unfortunately, a lot of the times, I don't think it is. I don't think it is.
Really good advice. We've probably just got one round of questions left. It's been nearly an hour already. So this one, how did you decide which area of law you wanted to practice? Should we just go around the table and start with you, Isaac?
I can't answer the question.
It would be impolitic to answer that question, wouldn't it?
I need help with that answer, so I'm waiting for everyone else's answers. It's perfect timing for me.
Well, perfect. Okay then. Cool.
Yeah, I can answer that question quite easily. So I trained at London Transport, and my first seat was property law. But during my time in property law, I was asked to sit at an employment tribunal hearing, and it was a sex discrimination case, quite a big case now. It wasn't then, but it was at its employment tribunal stage. And I'd always had an interest in employment and industrial disputes, and probably that's one of the best places to go for industrial disputes, in London Transport being in-house law in London Transport. So I sat in on this tribunal claim, and I knew then that was the area that I wanted to practice. So when I eventually got to the litigation seat where employment was in, I made it clear that that's what I wanted to do. I had to spend the first 18 months after qualification doing a mixture of commercial litigation and employment, because I didn't have just an employment role. But then an employment role came up, and then, yeah, the rest is history, I suppose. But I've always known that I wanted to do employment. I think if I didn't do employment, I wouldn't be a lawyer. So yeah.
So you found it.
Yeah. Well, I found it then. I don't know if I still found it now, but certainly that was the reason why I became an employment lawyer, because I'm very interested. I'm interested in it because it's about people, about the stuff that we're talking about here, not just in terms of discrimination and race discrimination, but how people's working lives affects them. It's quite technical. And it's quite fast moving. So if you do employment law, there's always cases on employment law. There's always something in the news about employment law. So if it's not Uber, it's about Brexit or whatever. It's always fast moving. And tribunal cases compared to civil litigation cases, they tend to finish a lot quicker, so you can sort of move on rather than having to just. A case can go. I was on a civil litigation case for 9 years, and I just thought there's no way I could be doing this. It's just too much.
Fabulous.
Yeah, so that's the reason.
Thank you. And Marcia?
I always thought I was going to be a criminal lawyer, because when I was growing up, I was growing up during the Brixton riots, Tottenham riots, and so on. So I was very much thinking, well, I'm going to go out there and defend all these people who are being stopped because of their colour. I've got police station accredited, done the whole thing, and then I didn't like crime, psychosis, and then I just thought, I can't do this. And then back then, you never had legal aid franchises, so I worked for a general practice firm, and then started to do asylum and got very into asylum and immigration law and European law, and that was it. Very successfully, never looked back. And then I love immigration, and I don't like crime. Sorry. Yeah.
I thought that I was going to be a litigator, and I remember when I was told that I'd have to do a real estate seat, I was really angry, and I threw the biggest tantrum I've ever thrown in my whole entire career. I did it. I had a really good supervisor and gave me a lot of good work experience. I worked on some amazing projects, the King's Cross regeneration as a trainee. And I think once I got started working on those projects and having a big understanding about the property industry and how commercial it was, and the amount of independence I was given as a trainee to negotiate documents and to work with surveyors, I just decided it was for me. But I didn't even like land law at university. I didn't like the property module on the LPC, and I definitely didn't want to do a seat. So I always told everyone to keep a completely open mind, because it was actually my last seat as well. And my firm at the time was going through redundancies, and I found myself actually applying to other firms to do that seat. And I remember speaking to someone at Graduate Recruitment, who was like, "Do you remember when you called me and you threw this tantrum and you said that I'd ruined your career and you're not going to be able to qualify?" And I was like, "Yeah." But obviously, I didn't know what I was talking about. So just keep an open mind, and you will find what works for you, and it will feel like home when you're in the right area.
Sandra, can we ask you the same question?
Yeah.
Oh, so you've probably heard this before, but I was a social worker before I became a lawyer, and doing child protection work and sitting behind counsel at court, listening to them regurgitate the statement, the beautifully prepared statement that I had prepared, and they were ad-libbing in a way that I didn't really appreciate. So I thought, actually, I need to do that job. But then when I qualified and started doing my seats, I did a seat in crime, and I just loved it. It was me. I'm home. Done. Good. So we've been in discussion with Marcia Longden, Paul McFarlane, Natalie Carter, and Isaac Eloy, and we have finished. We've got to the end of an hour. Thank you very much for listening in, and thank you very much for taking part. Tonight has been the brainchild of Jeanette Thompson from Kingsley Napoli Solicitors, who's here listening intently, and Harry Parker has been a great help in setting us all up. Thank you very much, everybody, for your contribution. Good night.